Perfect. We're recording now. And the format of tonight will be that we'll just do a bit of scene setting and hear from our guest speakers about their vision for an Aotearoa where everyone can go to the dentist when they need to. I'll give an overview about our Green Party policy as well. And just as a reminder that you're welcome to use the Q&A function, which if you're on, well, both on a mobile or a desktop, it should be at the bottom of your screen. And then we'll have some help just filtering through the questions and try to answer as many as we can before the webinar ends. But I guess to get started on the topic that you're all here today, which is our free dental care for all announcement. This is an issue that I've always been really passionate about, and one that from my previous work and Brooke's current work at Auckland Action Against Poverty was unmet dental needs was something we would be seeing every day. And I myself experienced the reality of having to, it was cheaper for me to visit family back in Mexico and go to the dentist while I was there than literally get dental treatment in Aotearoa, and that always felt really absurd. And I think that is a reality for many people where they're either putting off going to the dentist or getting into massive debt, often with the agencies that are supposed to support them, unfortunately. And we know that the cost of going to dental is a major reason why people put off going to the dentist. And, you know, when you consider that on average, the cost of going to the dentist is about $350. You can see why someone on a benefit or on minimum wage would just simply not be able to afford those costs. It's basically half a weekly wage from someone being on a minimum wage. And we know that a third of people here in Aotearoa are experiencing tooth decay. 1 in 10 are experiencing things like root decay. And we also know, and again, I saw this basically on the daily, how those unmet dental needs and unmet sort of oral health needs were contributing to people's health, broader health issues, including things like diabetes, heart conditions, and impacting on their mental well-being and their confidence. And so a lot of people were faced with the choice of entering tens of thousands of dollars into debt with agencies like Work and Income to get the treatment they needed, or to basically live in pain and not be able to attend work or look after the loved ones because they were, or get enough sleep because of the pain that they were living in. And so this is why we've launched this policy. And before we go over the detail of the policy, I guess I wanted to pass on to Brooke first of all. Brooke, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to our audience, and the question for you to get us started would be about what is your vision for an Aotearoa where everyone can go to the dentist when they need to, and I guess what do you feel needs to change to get us there? So over to you, Brooke.
Oh, thank you, Ricardo, for the invitation tonight to come and hang out and speak about things that we all love about together, and for opening us in karakia. Thank you to Max for being here, and so Gordana and Courtney for the tech support. So my name's Brooke Pao Stanley. I'm the coordinator with Auckland Action Against Poverty. If people aren't aware of who we are, our day-to-day consists of advocating for people at Work and Income to ensure that they receive their full benefits, while also campaigning alongside other groups and organisations for a poverty-free Aotearoa. We're also, AAAP is involved in a lot of campaign work, and one of them is Dental for All, which is a coalition of anti-poverty groups, dental associates, unions and the like. And so it's a really broad coalition that's calling for universal dental, so dental to be brought into the public health system. And we launched last year, was it, Max? We put out a petition. Within a few days, we had over 10,000 signatures and a lot of support for, as you mentioned, Ricardo, the vision for free dental in Aotearoa. I think my vision is pretty much self-explanatory. It's within that statement. It's like, yeah, free dental makes sense. Like, I mean, not only is it important for our health, it's also like, it also speaks to the issue of equity, I think, within our health system, and that the fact that cost is such a massive barrier for people to be well is kind of a problem. It's a massive problem. It's not kind of a problem. It's a huge problem. It's not aligned with te tiriti or mati ke mai. And so we're really stoked about the Greens putting forward a free dental policy, as well as plans, you know, the whole costing thing. You guys do the most around that kind of stuff. So it's really nice to see a really clear plan laid out. And we think the Dental for All Coalition is really, really happy that this has been, picked up by you guys, but also hoping that other political parties will feel inspired to, you know, have that as part of their policy as well. And ensuring that the models are important and work well for everyone within the community and everybody involved in that work. So, I mean, as you know, Ricardo, and even you, Max, like you've been part of the AAAP fam, we have a lot of people coming in to see us on the daily who need to access support from MSD for dental care. Often people aren't even going to see the dentist, and so they're getting to a point where it's the treatment that's required is quite extreme and therefore way more expensive. I think you mentioned that it was $350 on average, but for a lot of the people in whānau that we see, it would be way more, and that's because they've left it for so long, and the build-up of that means that, yeah, they're in a lot more pain. And like I mentioned, they need the treatment that's required to respond to their needs is a lot more. So, I mean, it just sucks that people can't go to the dentist. I remember when I actually got my 3 wisdom teeth taken out when I was 17 from the guidance, and that was advice given to me by my dentist, because he said, once you turn 18, it's going to be too expensive for you. And so it's not only for people who are receiving income support or even in low wage work that can't afford to go and see a dentist. It's people who are also working as well. And so I think that's why we've gotten so much support for the campaign that we're part of, Dental for All. We did some polls as well. We commissioned polls, and it looked at over 70% of people put off going to see the dentist because of cost. There was broad support from voters across the board, across the political spectrum. I think it was sitting at around 77% that they all agreed that this should be brought into the public health care system. So yeah, thank you so much to the Greens. I think Te Pāti Māori is also really supportive, and to anyone that's kind of pushing for it. I think the barriers are around actually just getting people to believe that this is a human right and that everybody should be entitled to this type of support. So there's that, but then also the political willpower from the parties and also from us on the ground. Like if we keep pushing for those things and demanding that this is what our communities need and deserve, I think it's a really good platform that we can all kind of work together from. So yeah, that's me.
Brooke, thank you. And I think just bouncing off that, I really like how you mentioned that it's a tiriti issue. We know that the Crown does have a responsibility to look after people, and the fact the Crown has failed to do so and has created health inequities on top of that, where Māori have even greater unmet oral health needs is, I would agree, a breach of our tiriti responsibilities. And I think it's also a climate issue with climate change impacting our communities and creating greater economic stress. It'll be those communities who can least afford to withstand the impacts of climate change who then will also be able to, will not be able to afford accessing healthcare that is currently costly and within a private kind of funding delivery model. So yeah, I think it's good to bring that kind of holistic approach to this analysis. I'll pass it on now to Max. And I guess, Max, the same question applies to you about what is your vision for an Aotearoa where everyone can go to the dentist, and that is not, and there's no barriers to it, and to introduce yourself as well. Yeah, over to you, Max.
MP Ricardo, and thanks Brooke for being here and for all the work you do. Brooke, thanks also to Cortana and Courtney for the work you've done organising this. Yeah, ko Max Harris tuku ingoa he Pākehā hou. Yeah, my name is Max. I'm Pākehā. I usually live in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, though I'm in a little booth in Parliament in Pōneke, Wellington at the moment, with this strange backdrop. Yeah, my vision is a lot of what Brooke said, and it comes out of experiences myself, even though I have lots of privileges of dealing with the cost barrier of going to the dentist, and also people close to me and in my community who I've seen face worse health and other problems because of dental being a barrier. And I guess my vision, is for a society where we're a little closer to people living without shame because of their dental issues, a society where people don't hesitate to get essential healthcare, a society where people don't put off going to a job interview or going to a social occasion because of their dental pain or the shame and stigma that they feel, and a society where we build out our health system on the founding principles that the system really imperfectly realizes. I think a founding principle of our health system is that if you have essential health needs, you should be able to get the care that you need without paying for it. It's why, as has happened to me, if you need major surgery, you should be able to get that surgery without paying for it. But we have this strange cutout where we decide that your teeth aren't worthy of that core principle. And so my vision is a healthcare system that honors that. And I think one other reason I'm really excited about the Greens policy is it's universal. And I think that a universal dental service it is also amazing in the vision of the society that it can usher in. I think what's so important about universal services, like what universal education is meant to be or universal healthcare, is that it kind of raises the floor for everyone, the services that we're entitled to. And it also creates that political buy-in, in particular from the middle class, since they also benefit from a service. And it takes a little bit out of the market. Like, I really believe that some things are too important to be left to the market. And actually, even though that sounds kind of high level, I think that's really crucial for building a better society, because when we take a little bit of a key service out of the market, we say that whether you can pay for something doesn't determine your worth. We make it a little bit less central to our lives, whether you can pay, whether you have money. And I think, and we start to say to people, these are things that we're all entitled to, regardless of whether you can pay. And I think that can be a beautiful thing, and we have to keep fighting for it. In terms of the barriers, I won't go on for too long, but I agree with everything that Brooke has said. I think in the past, the barriers have been, I think, like having a costed, credible plan. I think a barrier has been perceived unwillingness from dentists to get on board, and also political will, as Brooke said. I think what the Greens have provided is that credible, costed plan. So that's that first barrier out of the way. And I think we've seen a whole lot of dentists get on board, including the Dental for All Coalition. And sorry, I should have said, I didn't really explain my work, but I work part of the week with Action Station as a campaigner. So I'm speaking on behalf of tonight. And I also help to convene the Dental for All Coalition. I think we've got dentists, some really inspiring dentists, including Hugh Trengrove, who are part of the coalition, including Te Ao Marama Aotearoa New Zealand Māori Dental Association. And we've seen interesting engagement with other dentists, including from the Association of Salaried Medical Specialists, ASMS, that we can talk about more. So that's that second barrier. I mean, I don't think that should stop us, but that has been perceived as a barrier. And then the last thing is political will, which I think we have to continue to fight for. But I think there is this window of opportunity this election to show how important this is to everyone, to show how exciting this is. And I'm confident that we can make this something that is not just possible, but inevitable, if we can show our people power. So that's enough from me. But thank you so much for having me on this call.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much, Max. Yeah, I really feel the universal component is really, really important as well in terms of what the end goal is. We want to get there. And I guess just before I'll just going to go now in explaining what our policy entails. Before I go into that, I guess I want to put a few caveats in terms of we chose to focus on outlining a journey into providing universal free dental care and also building our capacity in the public sector to deliver that. But we recognize that actually good oral health comes from many other policy levers, right? Including what we call social determinants of oral health, that we know income and housing are really, really important determinants of good oral health. This is why we also have our income guarantee and our pledge to renters, because we recognize that those policies actually have an impact on people's oral health. We also recognize that there's a lot more work to be done to do things like ensure that people have an abundance of nutritious kind. And this is why in our manifesto, we have things like expanding the Healthy School Lunches program. And we've continued the call to hold supermarkets to account, particularly with things like their advertising practices. And so I think this policy we launched focuses on an aspect of that, but I think for us, it's also important to recognize that there's other policy levers that we need to activate to deliver the best oral health possible for our communities. And in terms of what our specific policy entails, it's basically extending in the short term the ability to provide things like free annual checkups and cleanings, but also ensuring that people can get access to free basic dental care such as fillings, sealants, and tooth removals, and then sort of in the medium term be able to extend that to specialists in secondary care, which includes things like oral surgeries, root canals, and other sort of medically necessary specialist care. And part of that is about acknowledging that phasing it in will make the delivery of it possible, and that initially we'll need to basically partner up with the private sector, which is currently where the delivery of dental care happens, as we build the capacity of our public sector to deliver and kind of transition the workforce as well into the public sector. And so we do acknowledge that it's a bit of a sort of phasing in journey, where we do need to initially recognize that because it's all delivered within the private sector, that it's going to take some time to build the public sector capacity. We also recognize that there are barriers to accessing dental care, which is not just cost. And some of that includes actually reaching our communities, whether it's in remote areas or in areas where we actually need people who understand their community to be able to deliver those services. And we know that dental vans and portable clinics and community dental clinics play a huge role. So part of that is resourcing those services and basically boost the funding for those services to be able to reach those communities. And that is, I guess, a barrier and an issue across the whole primary health system. But we, in this kind of piece of dental care, we recognize that more needs to be done, and that is something that will also support people below the age of 18, because even though we know that at the moment it's free for under 18s, there are still issues in terms of having those services access the people who need them, and that does include making sure that funding is in places like Marae and other sort of community centers where we know the community is at. And then there's also the issue of funding and resourcing kaupapa Māori approaches, and that is basically resourcing the Māori Health Authority to support existing Māori providers. It's also around putting some funds around iwi hapu and Pacifica health providers as well. And then there's also understanding that part of that whānau-based treatment is really important, because it is actually like in some communities, whether it's Pacifica Māori or some migrant communities, like especially when they're tight-knit communities, you'll be able to assess family needs on a kind of final basis, and that actually can help then remove those barriers for people actually accessing the services that are there. And we recognize that actually that scaling up will need to have a workforce boosting component, which is why we recognize that there is an area of immigration leavers will need to access. And even though most of the professions are in the green list, we also recognize that there's other immigration pathways we can access around family reunification, to recognize that many of the people moving in here are not just moving as individuals, but are actually moving with their family. But also in the medium to long term, it's about boosting our domestic workforce, because we can't just rely on competing and taking resources away from other countries to be able to provide free universal dental care. And so boosting our domestic workforce is the enduring solution. And one of the first steps is increasing domestic placements for dentistry, which we've arbitrarily capped at 60. And then we think we have the ability to lift that for an additional 20 placements from 2024, and then basically review training pipelines and placement numbers to just kind of scale that up as needed. And then there's also the need to diversify our workforce and recognize that currently we don't have enough Māori and Pacifica dentists and just workers within the sort of oral healthcare system. And so there's things that we can do around introducing scholarships, ensuring that we provide that income support for people who are studying so that they can actually complete their studies, and then also reviewing what we call a health workforce plan to boost the Māori and Pacifica workforce. And this is where some of the work we've done across the term, and Chloe's done, and Chloe Sorbrick, my colleague's done, in the inquiry around student well-being, where we identified that we need to do more around stipends and kind of income support for people as they're studying. And so we do think that's connected to that other pieces of work around ensuring that actually we're supporting those students from all sorts of backgrounds, including low socioeconomic backgrounds, to be able to complete those studies. And there's also the need to basically upskill and train oral health therapists. And so there's a need to provide those pathways as well, and also work on things like recruitment. And so, like I said, this will be phased. And so we do kind of think that by the end of 2054, people will be able to access a range of services and for free, including in, the local health services and clinics, marae, workplace community centers. And then later on the line, we'll boost the specialist care, and that's in 2025. This, by the way, is all being paid for our wealth tax. You may have heard of our wealth tax announcement, which was our first policy announcement. And that one is the one that funds most of our other big headliner policies. And if you think you're affected by the wealth tax, you may want to double check, because it's targeting the 0.7% richest New Zealanders, and that is for basically couples who own assets of 4 million, not including mortgages or other debt they may have. And so that's 2 million for individuals. And under that broad tax reform plan, 95% of people will actually be better off. We do think that tax reform is really important and it's really needed. And the great thing about if we're able to get our wealth tax across the line is that once introduced, it's not common for parties and future governments to wind those major tax reforms back. They may tweak them, but every time a tax has been introduced, it kind of stays. Sometimes that means we have potentially not so great or regressive taxes that are true that state. But I guess I want to give people the confidence that the history of tax in Aotearoa is one where whenever a new tax is introduced, it kind of just stays around. So the risk of future governments completely dismantling it is really not really there, because then those governments would have to make massive cuts to public services, and that's just not palatable to justify, particularly with something like this, where we start a transition to public service delivery of dental care. And so that is the sort of overarching plan. It includes partnering with the private sector at the beginning, moving on to building that public sector capacity. It's about also recognizing that we'll need to face it in terms of the level of care we provide for free and build a workforce and those education and training pathways. It's all, I'll get us to put a link, or I'll put a link actually on the chat so you can review the full policy as well. But yeah, we've got a fully costed, fully comprehensive plan on this. So I'll finish my policy rant there. And I wanted to pass on to our panelists to just, I guess, respond to this. And I'll start off with Max this time. I guess around what are your views around this policy? I guess, you know, you talked about the universal kind of component to this, and I know you've been a big fan of this concept of universal basic services, Max. But I guess how do you feel about the policy in and of itself?
Thanks, Ricardo. And yeah, I've already talked about why I think universalism is, a really important part of it. I guess a few other things that I think are really great in this policy are, like as Ricardo said, how integrated it is, how it sees dental as being nested within like policy we have on food and te tiriti policy, because I agree that te tiriti or waitangi is crucial for all areas of policy, and obviously is raised by how we currently treat dental. So I really like that kind of integrated thinking about the different kind of society that we need to build and how universal dental fits into that. I like how it acknowledges other barriers beyond cost, and so having mobile dental clinics helps to get the health system to people and to communities, and recognizes that there are other reasons why people might not access the service even if you removed cost. I think the focus on resourcing Māori providers is really important. And we know there's institutional racism within the healthcare system, and that more needs to be done to address that. And I guess maybe lastly, I think it opens the door to other conversations as part of a staged policy. So I think it's really great that there are free annual checkups and basic care. And I guess as we think about building a strong service over time, we might even think about kind of broader criteria of reducing pain and general prevention and broadening out funding over time. But as Ricardo was saying, that's something that can be achieved once kind of public support is cemented and it's been established. The other thing is, totally agree with Brooke. If anyone hasn't read the Mātike Mai report, I think it's an amazing political vision, and that talks about a kāwanatanga sphere, a tino rangatiratanga sphere, and a relational sphere. And I really like this policy's emphasis on funding Māori providers. I think it also opens the door to a conversation about, resource transfer to iwi hapu and other Māori entities as part of exercising tino rangatiratanga, even outside of the Māori Health Authority and Te Whai Ora, which is potentially within the Crown kāwanatanga sphere. So it's exciting for what it does. I think it's rigorous, it's well costed, there's a source of funding, but also for the kinds of conversations that it opens up. So I'm really grateful that the Green Party's had the political will and the courage to stand behind this. And I hope that we have an election where we're talking more about dental than about roads or anti-Māori racism or being tough on crime.
Awesome. And Brooke, do you have any reflections, I guess, on what we've outlined?
Sorry, what was that?
Do you have any reflections on what we've outlined? Is there
all right. I thought we said something else. Sorry, I was like, is that all the question? No, I don't know. I just want to reiterate what Max said and tautoko what he said. It's super cute. And I love that it's a policy that's grounded in love and care. I would really encourage us to party vote for policy and solutions that are grounded in love and care this election. I think those are the solutions that we know work in our communities. And as Max mentioned, moving away from this like fear-based politics and fear as a strategy that we've seen play out every 3 years is so boring and predictable, towards, actual solutions that we know will work and are required for the transformation that we're all kind of dreaming into. So, yeah.
Love it. I guess with those reflections, concluding, we can actually move. We're nice and early. We've got quite a few questions in the chat, in the Q&A section. Keep them coming, but we can probably actually start moving on to the Q&A section. I may do some quick fire answers for some of them, but then I'll pass on a few of those if you want to sort of make any reflections, Brooke and Max. The first one we had is, why aren't we removing GST from dental care, or why is that not on the table? And I guess it would be because if we make it free and part of the public service, then we kind of remove even more barriers than just focusing on GST. Then the other quickfire question was whether unions have identified this as something that should be raised in collective bargaining. I guess, and I'd be keen to get your reckons on this one, Max, because I guess there is that potential to have your employer cover the current costs of some annual checkups or whatever, that once we do make it fully free, I guess that may not be needed later on the line. So do you have any reflections, I guess, on somebody who's been keeping a track on the union movement, I guess, how this relates to union work?
Yeah, thanks, Ricardo. Yeah, maybe I'll just make 2 quick points. One on the work we've done with unions as part of Dental for All, and then secondly, just on that model versus a universal model. And so, yeah, there have been lots of unions that have engaged on this, which has been great. In particular, ASMS, which wrote this report called Tooth Be Told at the end of last year and commissioned the polling, which Brooke mentioned, showing 74% of New Zealanders back universal dental, including 77% of Labour and Green voters and 73% of National and ACT voters. But also other unions have been engaging too. So NZNO has had an interest in this. First Union has come along to meetings. PSA has had discussions. So obviously unions, in my view, are a very important vehicle for the kinds of change we need. And I think continuing to engage with your unions on this issue would be great. Just on that kind of proposal of this being raised in collective bargaining, I guess, hopefully I'm not misinterpreting the question, but one model might be seeing if unions and certain workforces can have dental be provided as part of work. Another model is like a universal service. I think one reason why universal option is so much better is it means that kind of the core services of our lives don't depend on us having a job and us having a workplace or a union that provides that. And I think we see that in America, where the private healthcare system, which we sort of have in dental, but the private healthcare system very much is tied, or has been tied in the past, to whether you can get health insurance through your work. And in the same way that privatizing a service makes how much money you have so much more central to our lives, having a service delivered through work then makes your work more central to your life, and it means you can be more precarious. It means it's more stressful when you might face the loss of your work. So I think the great thing about universality is it as the name suggests, it's genuinely for everyone in the country. Anyway, I could go on for ages about that, but hopefully it starts to give an answer.
Thank you. We've got another question about which reads, how do we mobilize our whānau who don't see this as an important issue with everything else going on in the world? And I'll lean a bit on you, Brooke, if you've got any reflections. My brief reflection reading this is actually dental issues are very common and universal, and I would say having a toothache is a relatively normal experience. So I guess why I'm excited about this policy is that it actually can open up some really good political conversations with our communities. And I think a lot of it is about having that conversation about people's human experiences with dental. But Brooke, do you have any questions about, or sorry, any reflections or comments about the conversations you've had about dental and your other campaigning work you've done? Like, how have you approached that?
Yeah, I think, thank you for that question. I think it's a really important question given the types of experiences and things that are happening for our people in whānau in our communities at the moment, I think it comes back to, as you say, the conversations that you can have with our families, the relationship, and a lot of the work that's required in order to mobilize our families is actually real slow burn work, and depends on the strength of our relationships. I think it also comes back to, as Ricardo mentioned, about what we believe and can encourage our families to believe that what is possible and what is what we deserve actually, and what's required for all of us to be well. That dental is connected to so many other health issues and problems that many of our families face. And so bringing it back to the conversation of what do us and our families need to be well, and really pushing that what the things that we need in order to be well should be made free and universal for all. So I know how handi's that mahi is, but I really encourage us to have those conversations with families, because often if it's coming from people that we love and trust, it hits way deeper and is often like more permanent. So kia ora for that question.
Thank you, Brooke. I'm just going to do some quick fire answers for some of the questions. One of them from Marion Sanson is around, is there assistance for people to get dentures and for changes to dentures for fit and gum care? Basically, yes, that would be the goal, is to end up covering the whole range of care. Second question, which I think is an interesting one, is how to differentiate between cosmetic and health-related care. I think part of the problem is that a lot of health-related care has been labeled as cosmetic, and that's part of the challenge we've had. And so part of redefining that dental care as healthcare is actually then shifting that conversation. We've had a comment from a relatively long comment from Roy Murphy, but I'm going to surmise his point around a reflection that Roy was making around costs and people talking about the costs that they charge based on things like student loans they have to pay off. I think that's like a good point to unpack, in that like part of the education system and how it creates hardship by nature of keeping many students in poverty and people with a huge debt to repay once they finish a degree can incentivize some of those things. But I think part of the other work we need to do in the tertiary education space around creating a genuinely fee-free education system, having proper stipends and an income guarantee for students, is about then incentivizing people to take up roles in that workforce and completing their degrees. So I think to answer that sort of reflection, it's it's about enabling people to feel like going into that workforce is it's a realistic option for them, and that the cost of studying in and of itself won't be a barrier. Just from Bronwyn, we've had and by the way, raise your hand, both of you, if you want to chip in any of this quick fire ones, because I'm just trying to run through that. So we've had one about, what about educational programs and toothbrushes in schools? And that is one that has come up a lot in our comments, often in a more kind of I feel this question is good faith, but often there's some kind of what about isms to push back against free dental. We actually have what we call the primary health organizations, who often actually can have strategies and sort of their communities around things like the provision of things like toothbrushes and or toothpaste, etc. And I think there is something about resourcing those so they can do that work around the education, the provision of free toothbrushes, etc., because that is another component of it. And then in terms of on the prevention side of things, then the fluoridization element, which Dr. Gary Payinda touched on in his reflection, that is another thing that we've supported in terms of kind of taking the politics out of a fluoridization and then making it more of a genuine public health issue, because we do acknowledge that it plays a huge role in prevention, but we recognize that even with all of those things, people may still develop health conditions, which may carry, like, no matter how assiduous you may be with your tooth, like your brushing, like some people will have dental care needs, and there shouldn't be a cost barrier, right? And some of that specialist care, for example, is about there may be disabled people that have very specific dental care needs as well, that no matter how many times you brush, or you know, or whether you live somewhere where the water is fluoridated, you may still need that help. There's one from Agnes from AAAP, a random member of the audience. That one is going to go to you, Brooke, which reads, those on benefits already have high debt to with MSD for dental care. Can the Green Party help get that debt wiped once free dental for all kicks in? I mean, our position is that debt should be wiped, but Brooke, do you have any reflections for the audience who may have never been on a benefit about what Agnes is talking about in terms of just those realities around just how much debt people get in at the moment, just for trying to access that care?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier in our conversation, cost is one of the biggest barriers to the people and families that we support at AAAP, and often they're going into high debt with MSD to get the dental care that they receive. So for people who aren't aware, any kind of support that people require who are on a benefit from MSD is actually considered a small loan. So the only thing that people don't have to pay back is food, and the rest of the costs are made recoverable. So that's anything to do with dental, it could be to do with school uniforms, it could be to do with whiteware, anything that is kind of essential to our thriving is we have to pay back. And so that's what our sister Agnes is speaking to, that the fact that so many people have to go into debt in order to receive dental care to ensure that they're well. And I mean, yeah, hard. I'm here for wiping it out. Should be part of Green Party policy, but hey.
Thank you. And I guess we had a question around whether there's going to be any pushback from people providing the service to protect their income. How does that factor in for free dental for all? And I guess we want to ensure that the public sector remunerates workers well. We want to ensure that there's pay equity as part of this. But Max, I guess I don't know if you have any reflections around this. I think that's often a conversation just not on dental, but just when we're thinking about public service delivery versus private and kind of salaries and stuff. Do you have any thoughts? It's okay if there isn't any, but I know you've done a bit of work on universal basic services, so whether this has factored at all.
I don't know if I have any specific thoughts, just that, I think building up capacity in the public service is something that, can be done over time, as happens in this policy. And to put it into the broader context, I think our public sector has been hollowed out a lot in the last 20, 30 years. And the way we build back the strength of the public sector is we task it to do ambitious things like deliver universal dental. That might only touch on one part of the question, but hopefully it's helpful.
Yeah. No, thank you. Other questions we're getting has been around kind of consumption of sugary drinks and just sugary items. And I think for there's this sort of thing about do we do a sugar tax to then have revenue for this, right? Or are there other revenue sources? And one of the things I'm particularly keen to explore as a separate piece of work in my commerce and consumer affairs portfolio are the regulations on advertisement, particularly in supermarkets, and how they can advertise sugary stuff front and center or to children, and how we package things. And so I think there is a whole other piece of work we can do around that, which in of itself, in my view, tackle some of those root issues, which is kind of that really aggressive marketing of sugary drinks and items to our communities. There's also, in my view, the need to expand, as I mentioned at the beginning, the healthy school lunches programs to all kids, and to kind of then look at how we do procurement and paying the people who make the lunch as well, etc. But that is another component to the kind of oral health piece that we want to ensure that is part of our overall overarching plan. Then we had a question around whether dentures were not included. That's something that's, I'm going to go back and check on the paper, because I mean, the background paper that we did, I was pretty sure it did. So if it's not clear in the policy paper we've got public, I can go back and check and just clarify that, because our goal is to have that full range of care being included, including some of that sort of medical equipment, but yeah, as part of that. Other questions we had was around whether free dental would be available to our international students studying in New Zealand and our working migrants. The way my understanding is, once you've been here for a few years, you can start accessing the public healthcare system, but that is, so while that may not be explicit in our policy, I personally do think there is something that we should be looking at in terms of how we've excluded people on temporary visas from accessing the public healthcare system, because we end up in a catch-22 where there's that recognition that we have limited public health resources, but by creating a whole cohort of people who then cannot access health services, we actually then create unmet need that then becomes harder to treat once they get the residencies. And so there's that sort of tension that I think government hasn't resolved. And I'm personally, as somebody who's been fighting to abolish the health requirements, well, particularly the sort of the ableist health requirements in our immigration system, that's something I think we should look at, because nobody should face having a visa declined because they needed to access healthcare. I'm just scrolling through the questions and just doing a quick time check, because there will be a few we won't get into, and I'm quite keen to maybe take note of some of those other questions that are there. One question we had was around, if it's improbable to get a wealth tax because of political realities, what's an alternative form of funding? I'm really keen to get your reflections from you two both, because we've had Labour rule out a wealth tax, right? And my quick answer to that is that it's not up to Chris Hipkins, but it's up to the voters. But I guess what is, as non-politicians, what's your kind of non-politician answer to this kind of tension of like, will we not get tax reform on the agenda? What's kind of a hopeful message you would impart to people who feel like they really do want tax reform to fund all of these great things? So are there any comments you have around the current politics of this?
Yeah, I just think like, yeah, I agree with you, Ricardo. It's not up to Chris Hipkins or anyone within that space to say what's possible and what isn't. Especially coming from Labour, who had a majority mandate, like you can't really say. And them rolling this out is kind of a little bit weak in my opinion. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, we need to be voting for parties that are willing to tax wealth in order to fund services that are essential for our communities to be well and to thrive. And so for me, it's really straightforward. Just don't vote for other parties, fam, that are willing to tax wealth, so that we can, start to create the society that actually is good for all of us.
Could I just add, Ricardo, like, I think there's I agree with all of that. And I also think there are lots of options. I support the wealth tax policy, but I think, yeah, there are other ways you could fund this. You could increase corporate tax, which would raise a lot of revenue. You could increase the top rate of income tax or change top brackets. And you don't have to get into a technical conversation, but just make that point that there are actually lots of options for funding this. And one thing that's quite important is, because this does come up in conversations that I've had about dental, is like, oh, isn't it just too expensive? Is it's always interesting, like, what gets called too expensive. Like, we were just talking on the weekend about a second harbour crossing plan that was $35 to $45 billion. To put that into perspective, what we're talking about here is $1.4 to $1.7 billion, I think. And whenever the government has done major things in the past, like setting up social security or setting up our public healthcare system, that has had some cost, but we say that's important enough to expand the social services that we should all be entitled to. So that would be one way I would deal with the cost issue if it comes up in your conversations with whānau and communities.
I also just want to throw back to what Max said earlier about like, it's actually about what we consider to be important. And those conversations, I feel like cost shouldn't be the main kind of focus in terms of like, oh, but who's going to pay for it kind of thing. It should be more focused on actually, this is what's right for us in our communities. And we should always, well, be moving towards solutions and conversations where it's like, actually, this is the right thing to do. And so we should do it.
Right. And thank you. Yeah, it's nice to hear answers from non-MPs about this. Because I kind of feel like we, you know, like, of course, I would say party vote green to get tax reform on the next government's agenda and free dental care. And so, yeah, it's good to see that other range of options as well presented around the alternative funding mechanisms we can always access. One thing that I should have, because I see some questions around underage people and accessing the sort of dental care. There's also the need to review the adolescent service agreement, by the way, to ensure funding is sustainable and also work around enhanced workforce planning that benefits both the children and adolescent services. And so we recognize that there is work we need to do around improving access to dental care for underage people, because even though there is humongous unmet dental care needs for adults, we acknowledge that not everyone who currently can access it for free is being reached. And that is something, yeah, we're keen to explore and we're committed to exploring as well. And part of the wealth tax, by the way, is that the way we've designed it in terms of the revenue is that it gives us wiggle room to act on top of the stuff we've announced. It gives us wiggle room to then work on those additional things that may crop up. And this is, I think, why we do need that bold tax reform, because it is about having enough revenue to also work on unexpected things that may come here and there to ensure that something like this actually works. And because we're all of us, I think, are keen to ensure that whatever we put on the table is something that works and it's a live policy. It's something that we'll need to adapt and adjust based on the uptake, based on the challenges, based on other dynamics that may or may not occur. But with that, I am going to start winding us up. So I guess passing on to both of you, any final remarks that you'd like to make, brief final remarks, that anything you've omitted that you'd like to mention?
No, I don't think so. Just thank you for having me tonight. And yeah, so keen for free dental for all. That's what we deserve.
I agree with that. And just really quickly, I think in my conversations, the two things that come up again and again are, doesn't it cost too much and won't the dentists block it? Because the original reason we didn't have dental as part of the public healthcare system is that dentists negotiated it to be outside. And just one response on that is that, first of all, we know there's lots of dentists who've actually got behind the Dental for All Coalition, but also it's quite interesting that New Zealand Dental Association, which is the lobbying body for dentists, initially, I think in response to the Green policy, put out a strong statement. But then Mo Amso, the head of NZDA, said, I think yesterday, that he acknowledged that like cost is the biggest barrier. And he also said he would consider that some parts of the policy need to be tweaked. But what was really interesting is, yeah, it wasn't like a flat out rejection. And talking about tweaks is, yeah, very different from talking about like setting aside the policy. So I don't think that's a very strong counter argument as well, just in case that comes up. And yeah, totally agree, like with everything that's been said, please go out and have conversations about this because this is something worth fighting for that, yeah, would genuinely make our communities and society better.
Awesome. Anything else, Brooke?
I'm good.
Cool. Well, look, I acknowledge there's a few questions that have gone unanswered. Feel free to email us if you've got any burning questions or comments, particularly for the healthcare professionals who are in the panel, like feel free to reach out to me. I'm always really happy to kind of go into more detail on the sort of like policy stuff. And just want to give a huge thanks to you, Brooke, to Max, to Gordon and Courtney for being in the background helping us with the technical issues. To all of you who've attended, really appreciate you giving us your evening to have this discussion, and for engaging with the question and answer section as well. Really, really appreciated your thorough questions. Want to wish you well for the rest of the night, and want to also acknowledge that the Greens are not the first ones, and well, I want to always be like hopefully the last ones, but we're definitely not the first ones to campaign on free dental. This is an issue that has a long history of political activism in Aotearoa and in other countries where it's excluded from the public healthcare system. So we're leaning and standing on the shoulders of previous campaigners who have created the pathway for political parties to come this confidently and strong in an election year on something that is very well overdue. So yeah, just want to acknowledge those people who've given countless of hours of the time to do research on this, to do advocacy on this, for speaking on the media about their personal experiences, because they're ultimately doing the mahi to get us there. So with that reflection and the acknowledgements, we'll finish the panel, and yeah, just go well, stay well, talk to your family members and friends about free dental, and we'll see you on the campaign trail. Ka kite.